Hey everybody, welcome. It is the Meeple Service Show, and we are live and direct here with Connie Vogelmann. How you doing, Connie?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's good to
Doing okay.
see you again.
Yeah,
And
you too.
George, you doing well too, buddy?
Yeah, doing all right.
It's very is it like super bright in Portland right now?
Uh, it
Or
is.
your lights just on? I don't know. You look very you have a healthy glow about you, sir.
Yeah, I think the light's just coming in through the basement windows at quite just that angle.
There you go. Just the right angle. It's lovely. It's lovely. So everybody, we're here live, and on the East Coast, it is getting to 9 o'clock, and on the West Coast, it is 6 o'clock. And if you're in between, that's also a good time to have a conversation about what we're going to talk today about, which is player interaction. But before we do that, I want everybody to kind of get to know Connie. Connie, tell us about yourself. Who are you? Where you're from? How'd you get into gaming and game design specifically?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, Connie Vogelmann, designer of Apiary and Wyrmspan with Stonemeyer. I live in Washington D.C. I am currently an attorney. That's kind of my training. And I actually started playing games. I mean, I grew up playing trick-taking games. With my family, we played a lot of pinochle and we played a lot of cribbage. But I really got into the modern hobby in law school when one of my law school classmates came to me and said, "Hey, do you want to go to dinner and a board game?" And I was like, I don't know what that means, but sure, I guess we can play a board game. I don't know when the last time I played a board game was, but like okay. And it turns out that game was Settlers of Catan.
Of course.
So like so many people in the hobby, that was sort of my intro game, and then I kind of just really took off from there. I started a sci-fi board game heavy group in law school, like with a lot of students from some of the other grad schools there. And then when I moved to Washington D.C., um, it really became my social scene. I started going to a lot of meetup groups, and just kind of the ones that stuck were the board game ones. And so I really built a social circle around board games. And that was actually how I met my husband as well, at one of these meetup events playing board games. And I like to tell everyone that I was in the hobby before he was. But he actually is how I got into game design. So he had an idea for a board game, and I was like, "Oh, I'll help out. I can do some graphic design stuff. Like I'm not really a graphic designer, but like I'll help. Like I'm so excited." And it turns out that it was a very short-lived effort. Also, turns out we do not design well together at all. That was a bad idea.
Hey.
But then I really got the game design bug, and that was right around the time that I came up with the idea for Apiary, and then was really kind of off for the races. I mean, that was really my first game design, and so I have not looked back since then.
That's amazing. It's really cool that Apiary was the first game design that you did by yourself, and it also happened to be like signed and everything. That's not very common. But I think as people become like more fluent in game design and games and modern hobby, and you get people who are doing it from not necessarily a place of game design. Like you didn't go to school for game design. Lots of people don't go to school for game design, but a lot of people who start getting into games and game design have gone to school for lots of other things, right? And then it's like, oh, I'm looking at it from this angle or that angle. You tend to see, and that's I think what I like the most about game design. Like in this little chat here, we have a computer programmer, we have a psychology professor, we have a lawyer, and we're all game designers, and we all like games for probably similar but different reasons, and we can apply a lot of what we learn from our other lives to the games that we design. So, Connie, has anybody ever accused you of like being a rules lawyer?
Not too much actually. Interestingly enough, like when I first got into the hobby, absolutely. Like I was that stickler that was like, all right, let's look up the tiebreaker rule. Like, all right, what happens in this weird niche case? But actually, the more I've gotten into game design, and particularly with Apiary, there's a lot of edge cases in Apiary. It's a game with a lot
Yeah.
of variable player powers, a lot of instant effects, a lot of ongoing effects, a lot of weird interactions between the two, and some language that I think if I was to redesign, I'd probably do a little bit cleaner job of. And some of these forum posts are just incredible. The level of detail of the interactions, and they want the correct ruling. And I realize that it doesn't matter, which sounds a little bit terrible, but like the vast majority of these details, like it just doesn't matter. Like pick away and go with it, and it's fine. And I think I've been
Yeah.
applying that to a lot of my own game plays since then. That you can,
Yes.
so it's sort of funny. It's very kind of contrary to what I do in my day job.
Right. Where it actually does matter.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of arguing about the interpretations of these things. I mean, the same thing happens in games, obviously, but you're right. In the small ecosystem of your table, it doesn't matter as long as everybody agrees to
Mm.
be part of that magic circle. My
Yep.
magic circle may be slightly different than your magic circle, even though we're playing the same game, but we might have just interpreted something a little bit different. I tell this story a lot, and I don't know if you guys have ever heard it, but Belfort, one of our first games that was published, the British people who are in the UK playing it, scored it differently than Americans and Canadians because we have a different turn of phrase for some mathematical things. And so it was like half of this or something like that, like just the way that we say it. And so they were going like, "What do you mean I scored 21 points?" It's like, "No, you scored 21." They're like, "I thought I scored 18." It's like, "No, 21." Why 21? Because when this happens, this happens. Oh, that's not how we interpret it in Britain at all. So just language really does matter. And so I think you're right, Connie. I would definitely go back in some past designs and go through it with a fine tooth comb around wording. But at the end of the day, as long as people are having fun, and I think as long as everybody's playing consistently,
Mm.
it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. If it's a world championship, sure, put a little
Oh
asterisk
yeah,
next to the
absolutely.
winner,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
other than that, I don't really care,
Well,
right?
and that's a whole conversation. I think for another topic is just the maybe juxtaposition and a little bit of tension between some of the very high level competitive play for these games, and then the sort of intentionally variant nature of some of these Euro games that kind of by definition are introducing a certain amount of variance. And I think there is a certain amount of tension there between that kind of game and also all of these very little rules and complex turns, and then the sort of very high level play in WSBG and WBC and tournaments like that. But I think that's a topic for another night, perhaps.
Sure, you can go back and talk about that if you want. It's really interesting. Simon Ennis, I interviewed him, I don't know, a couple weeks ago with Erica for Ludology, and he's the director of the film The Hobby that Elizabeth is in, and Daryl and Eric and a couple other of people you know them. And so he designed a film about the designed a film. He directed a film called The Hobby about this hobby, and he actually went to the World Series of Board Gaming and followed one of his friends who was entering it for the first time. And it was just fascinating to see people play at that level with that much competitive nature about stuff that could actually have a lot of randomness in it into
Mm.
how you do it. But because they're all playing by the same set of rules and they agree to this randomness, I guess it's kind of, it's okay. And that is a whole different story. In terms of design, especially, input output randomness is a whole kettle of fish. And my quick answer to that, and I don't know what yours is, George, but my quick answer to that with randomness is like, well, does it fit the experience? Because if it does, then I'm putting it in. If it doesn't, I'm taking it out. And that's about it for me. I don't really, I have a personal preference, but that doesn't mean my games need to be a certain way or not. What do you think about randomness, George?
I mean, I think if we're talking about competitive play, I feel like if it's applied to everyone equally to some degree, and that depends on whether if we're talking about something with cards, or if I'm building my own deck, well, that's different. But if I have a means to track it to some degree and mitigate it to some degree, or at least I have the impression that I can mitigate it to some degree, I feel like it creates a positive competitive experience.
Yeah.
If I feel I am at the will of elements that I cannot influence or control, that feels inconsistent, and you question wins, and you don't have the same sort of impression of whether this is something you can really do in a competitive way.
That's fascinating. I think that way about jujitsu actually a lot. So, Connie, I don't know if you knew this, but George and I practice jujitsu. Not together, unfortunately. We've actually never rolled together. But I am the smallest person in my club by far. I weigh 125 pounds and I'm 5'2". So I'm super small, except for the kids' classes. But sometimes they tower over me too. And so I didn't know for the longest time if I was actually any good at jiu-jitsu. I'm a black belt. I am pretty okay, but before, when I was a white belt, it's like I don't know if I'm actually good at this or if people are just letting me like win,
or
and
if they're
so
just working on something while they're rolling with you.
So I had to start competing to prove to myself that I was, and that's a very funny kind of correlate.
Yeah, it's the only reason I've ever competed. It's because I had the same question in my head. Like, is any of this? Are people just letting me get away with things, or am I having any real success here? Yeah,
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
I
definitely.
get you.
Cool. Um,
Sorry. I'm sorry. That just sort of for
so,
context.
so dear viewers, if you were wondering why Connie was typing furiously on her keyboard while we were talking, it was good because we were just kind of vamping.
Yeah.
Her cat got stuck in the closet, and she needed her husband to assist. I have a very funny story to tell about cats getting stuck in things, and it's Jay's cat, not my cat. So Jay had a cat, and he doesn't have this cat anymore, but not because of this story. But they were renovating their house, and he's like, "Where's the cat?" And they figured the cat, ran out the door. They'll be back. Oh, the cat will be back. And then he comes home and he hears this meow, and he's like, "Kitty, where's this cat?" They had drywalled the cat into the wall because there had been a hole where they had cut something, and then the cat got in there in between, like Jay picking up a piece of drywall and turning around. The cat was in the wall, and then he sealed up the wall, and they didn't know where the cat was until the cat decided to speak up. And anyways, so
That's
this is why
entirely
you might
believable.
need somebody to help you get your cat out of the closet, so you don't just like leave him there.
Well, and this was obviously a much more minor version of that. But the closet door was open. Cat went into closet. Cat went to sleep in closet. Then cat woke up realizing door was closed, and
Yeah,
she
similar,
was starting
very
the freak
similar.
out process. So that was why I quick texted David, and I was like, help.
That's
So, anyway.
exactly what happened there. All right, audience, if you are listening, let us know where you are from. Let us know that you're logged in and checking us out. If you have questions for Connie about anything, like what's it like to be a lawyer and be so cool? How come you're not wearing your glasses? You have really cool glasses. I like Connie's glasses, by the way. They're always very,
Oh,
very
thank
cool.
you.
It's funny when I came on to the stream and you were there. It's like, that's not Connie because there's no cool glasses.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Well, as I said,
that kind of your
I
trademark.
can. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Well,
It's
it is
okay.
what it is. I can see which way am I. I'm the one that I can see close things without them, so I often take them
You're
off when I use the
nearsighted.
computer. Thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, let us know where you're at. And if you have questions for Connie, we're going to start talking about the main topic of the day, which is player interaction. So I'm going to actually start with George because George framed the question, and then he said, "Can we get somebody on who could talk about that?" And he mentioned apiary specifically. I said, "I know Connie. Let's get Connie." And then Connie said, "Yeah, let's talk about that." And then she wrote a 40-page dissertation. So that's what we're here to talk about today is Connie's legal brief. All right. So all the case law and precedents and all that kind of stuff will be
All right,
discussed
excited.
later.
Let's go.
But George, frame the question. What was the burning question in your heart of hearts?
So I was thinking about like classically more complex board games, whether it be engine builders or just I don't want to paint everything with the word Euro, but at least certainly those sorts of games, and where aside from the fairly ubiquitous sort of shared market in a lot of these games, we are effectively playing in our own boxes. We are doing our own thing on our own, whether it's a tableau or just in our own space. Often to the point where like the game is sufficiently complex that we have a limited capability to even like observe and really understand what other people are doing in their own areas. And yet these games don't feel like we're just playing solo experiences. And why does that work? And what goes into a design to make it feel like we are all sharing an experience, even though we're really mostly working in our own physical space? So
That's a
that
great
is the
question.
question I was thinking about.
Yeah. And I mean, without the unkind term of, multiplayer solitaire, I think George is talking about games that are a little bit even more than that. Like not more solitaire than that, but like they have more of a feel. Like there's definitely games you feel it's like, okay, this could have been a solo game, and I could just compare my score to other scores and it wouldn't change that much. But I think what George is talking about is those games that still feel like you're playing a game together, even though there's not a lot of common points of interaction, and there's definitely no like direct conflict and things like that,
Yeah.
right? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's fascinating, and I think like the sort of taking a step back, I think there's sort of two different, very distinct types of interaction in games, and I have I jotted down a whole classification system with a bunch of different axes on player interaction, which we can get into in just a minute. But before sort of breaking down some of those kind of definitional issues, one thing I wanted to flag was, I think there's a one thing that people underestimate a little bit is kind of the social construct of getting together and playing a game. Sen earlier mentioned the magic circle of playing a game, and I think that's really important. I mean, you guys, you and your friends or family sit down, you play a game together, you agree on the game, you agree that you're going to be there for a defined period of time, you agree to what the rules of the road are. I mean, if it's a social deduction game, that might be lying or cheating or stealing, kind of within that circle of the game. And even when these are less, interactive games, you're still all having that shared experience together. And I think it's a little bit interesting and maybe worth investigating just a little bit why we expect that from games in a way that we don't expect that from other activities. I mean, if you go to a dinner party or if you go see a movie with other people, like, I don't expect people to be stealing stuff from my plate. I don't say like, oh, that was a very non-interactive dinner party. So it's interesting to me that we hold games to a different standard. So I just wanted to kind of flag that for just a second there. And then I also want to kind of call out specifically that I do think when a lot of people say interaction, they do very specifically mean direct conflict. And so I think there's kind of a terminology, maybe mismatch there between the word that people are using and then what they're actually intending.
Yeah, I agree. There's some conflation there, where, and this comes from the concept that we had actually mentioned at the beginning. It's that literacy of game design and that literacy of gaming, the articulation of the ideas that are in your head and what you like and dislike. And a lot of people can describe it, but they for sure can't name it because that name is too precise or too technical for what their level of understanding is. And that's okay. I'm not saying everybody out there has to be like a game scholar, but that we are going to get mixed messages, especially when we have feedback from playtesters, right? They're going to say, oh, there's not enough interaction. It's like, what do you mean? What do you mean by interaction? Well, we weren't fighting. Okay, cool. That's a different type of interaction or a level or a layer of interaction. But the interaction that there is there, did you see that? And you don't have to like defend yourself, but just understanding that people are going to misname things when you're talking to them and giving you feedback is it's like giving yourself grace, because then you won't get into these fights that you don't have to get into. Just take their feedback, see if it aligns with other people, kind of make your notes about it. So, and this is where my training as a therapist comes in. Like, I never take anybody's words at face value. That's kind of my job, is not to. My job is to interpret what you mean by contextual clues around you and your situation in your life. It's like, when you said this, did you really mean this? And I'm going to ask you that question in a session, but I do that in feedback as well, right? It's like, when you said this, did you really mean this other thing? Okay, so we have a conflation between conflict and interaction. Let's go from there, Connie. What's next?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to first define, and I wanted to provide my own definition of interaction and then maybe get your guys' definitions of interaction. And then I wanted to talk about 4 different axes of consideration for different kind of types of interaction and ways that we can classify interaction. I don't actually have a 40-page thesis, but I feel like with enough time I could get there.
Well, I was just going to say, are we going to create like a whole like Vogelmann's model of player interaction? Because we'll do it. We'll do
I don't
that.
think so. But so for me, at least, I'm sort of thinking about this question a little bit. I was thinking about like, okay, how do you define interaction? What is interaction to me? And for me, I have kind of 2 main questions to sort of think about it. And one is, how much can people mess with me? How much am I kind of, as George said, building on my own little square? How much can other players come into that square? How much are my plans foiled? If it's a worker placement game or something like that. Is it an Agricola style, like, oh my God, I can't get this wood and my life is ruined? And then the second piece of it is, how much do I have to pay attention to others? Can I just keep my zone of attention on my little box? Will I do well at the game? Because I think a lot of the games that we consider to be very low interaction, that is not true of. I mean, if you want to play well, you very much need to be looking outside of that little box. So anyway, so that's my kind of definition, but I'd be curious to see how you guys sort of define or characterize interaction.
George? I think those are actually really, I don't want to say no notes, but yeah, I mean, those are the sort of 2 points. I want to harken back quickly to the idea of like the dinner party in the movie, and I think, and this may feed into the interaction, that I don't think we declare a winner at a dinner party, And in a lot
That's
of these
fair.
interactions, I mean, well, I mean, though I don't do a lot of dinner parties, so I could be wrong. I've seen people do dinner parties where they have like an element of competition in it, but I think it's more light. But no, I mean those would be the two. I would agree. There's an internal and an external sort of sense of interaction, um, and I don't know that every game needs the same amount of each. I mean, I think often you find like one of them it's like a 10-90 kind of split, even as much as, but it I suppose it depends on the nature of the game. And now I'm starting to ramble, so I'm going to pass to him.
I like what you're saying, George, there about this kind of sliding scale, like two sliders or whatever sliders that kind of go
Yeah.
across and maybe can all be one way. But I think you might be right in that if it's like 80% one way, the other one's only 20%, right? So we might get 50-50, but mostly we're going to get these like 80-20 splits or 90-10 splits. I do have to say that in Chinese culture, we actually do compete for food, but it's compete who pays for the meal. And it's me. It's me. I will win that fight every time. Uh, so it's the eldest male at the table is usually the one who's expected to pay, and then everybody else fights for it, and the eldest male should win that. But I've had like Missy, our friend Missy, she'll go pay for it while you're fighting, and then she'll come back and she'll go, "It's paid for," and we get all mad at her because she is neither male nor Chinese. So she just likes to disrupt our little fun bit. So it's mostly me and Nick Yu fighting for who pays the bill, and because I'm much older than Nick, I get to pay for the bill. Anyways, there you go. Jack Rosenblatt says that interaction is any time you can influence the thoughts, strategies, actions of another player with whether it's intentional or not. That's an
Hmm.
interesting way you think about it. And I think that harkens back to what Connie was saying about playing in your own little sandbox or having to notice what your neighbors are doing. And I really, really like that distinction, Connie, because it's true. If there are those games where I can just sit back and play by myself and not care what you're doing, even if the market changes because you took something from it, and I don't have to pay attention on your turns, I only pay attention on my turn. Those are the games that I actually dislike quite a bit. Well, so here's the thing. I don't dislike the game. I dislike playing the game, which is a weird thing to say. But if
No,
it
but
was
I,
an
I think
app,
that
I would play it forever,
yeah,
because it's
and
just the
I do think
mathematics
that's
are
a
fun.
but I think that's an important distinction too. I mean, it's a reflection of kind of your own personal taste, and I think that makes sense coming from a game designer who's I'm sure thought about this a lot more than a lot of kind of players who are just like very reflexively, I don't like it, it's a bad game, and those are two kind of very separate um, theses.
Yeah.
I was
Uh,
just thinking. Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry. I, I was just thinking one of the ways in which like we you end up influencing other players or almost all other players that you have no control over, but you are causing is just the score tracker on a lot of boards where like it is a representation of what you are doing that people are going to pay attention to. It's going to happen as a result of what you're doing, but like you're not directly trying to do this to other people. People will just instinctively acknowledge the hierarchy of scores and respond to it.
Yeah. Well, but I think this even goes to Jack's points too. I mean, in terms of like a very, very minor, this might be in Sen's category of games that he doesn't like. But, in terms of influencing others, you could have a situation where I know I'm behind. I can't do anything to you on your turn at all, but I can take a different strategic line knowing that I'm behind and knowing that I need to basically take a riskier path with a higher reward. And even that is the game influencing or other players in the game influencing my decisions, even if it's wholly indirect.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I'm okay with that in a lot of cases. It's more of this status of the how much does my attention have to not stray, but how much do I have to pay attention to the game is really for me what keeps me engaged in a game itself, right? So that's kind of a wholly other thing. Luke, one of the Lukes is here, and Luke Parnell says that interaction to him, he thinks about the moves that he makes to shape the moves of other players to different degrees, and he thinks more like tactics versus strategy when we're talking about interaction. Yeah, and I mean I would agree that especially for a lot of people who are thinking about conflict type games, that the grand strategy that you have may be like, oh, we're going to take this area and cut off their supply chain to other resources. That might be a very conflict-based strategy, right? Um, and while that is definitely going to impact directly and interact with the person, it's like the little itty bitty battles that you're having. I'm attacking you here. I'm building a fort here. I'm blocking your route here. That feels more interaction-y, right? That
Mhm.
take that interaction. Very cool. I like that thought too. Hello, Deadpan. How are you?
Although I would argue too, though, that there are certain strategic games, though, where the interaction definitely controls the strategy. In the sense of, I was just thinking, as you were talking a little bit about something like Puerto Rico, where I think I get the sense that, especially at higher level play, a lot of which strategy you pursue in the game is determined by what the players next to you are doing. Same with something like Navigador, you basically need to be desynced with your opponents in terms of like producing versus building and which goods you're investing in order to sort of have success there. So I do think that's kind of interesting that I think it's definitely more direct and more common with tactics, but I think there's some games definitely where your whole plan for the game is very influenced by particularly what your neighbors are doing.
Yeah, I would agree too. And those are the types of games that I like, right? Because I have to pay attention to my neighbors to see when to switch. I am really, really big on games that have like pivot points, like
Mhm.
where I have to pivot my strategy from I was collecting, now I better start producing, or I was, mining, now I need to start crafting, or whatever it is, right? Just a very simple like planting versus harvesting. Like when do I switch? When do I make that move? And it's usually dictated, like you said, by other players making decisions that changes the game state that says, okay, now is that time. Now is that key time strategically to do that. And you do tactics to do that, but it's to play out a larger strategy. So
Mhm.
I also agree with what you're saying as well, that there's something really cool about games where those interaction points aren't necessarily people doing stuff to you directly, but because they're doing things and they're changing the game state in such an overt way that's not just like I took something out of a market, that you have to start switching how you play, right? And that's when you feel like you're playing a game and not just you know sitting there twiddling your thumbs.
Which is funny. I think Sen, you and I think are probably very different because I tend to like the games that are. I mean, I actually came up with sort of a list of a bunch of different kind of types of interaction that I think are kind of ways to incorporate interaction into games that are a little bit less directly competitive. But I think the older I get, maybe the crankier I am, and I'm like, don't touch my stuff. It's my stuff. This is my tableau. Don't mess with it. But I think there's still an awful lot of ways to incorporate that kind of a little bit more dynamic environment and being more responsive to other players again without having people like very very directly influencing your own like very small space.
Yeah, I had a friend, Jeff Temple. I still have a friend. He is still Jeff Temple. Um, who who is exactly like that. He hated that. He would be fine if an event in the game, ruined something he was doing, but if another player did it, he just felt so bad about the game in general that he wouldn't play it again. It's interesting just how people are loss averse in many ways, but they're more likely to, and I don't know this everybody, I'd have to like look at the research, but if people are more loss averse when it's caused by an active agent versus by fate or the roll of a dice or something like that. I wonder how much more averse people are to being because they feel like they're picked on, right?
It makes me think of uh, all this discussion of tactics versus strategies, making me think of the opportunities to either in a market or in a literal draft to hate draft basically, and whether and there's two ways to look at that, whether the game itself gives you this the tactical leeway where you can make decisions that negatively impact other people without so negatively impacting your own progress that you take yourself out of the game. And there's just the table state as well. Like, do you play with a group of people who are going to tolerate you basically someone's about to do something cool and you're like, no, I don't think that's going to happen for you because I would like to win. And I have no criticism of that approach if the table is comfortable with it, but that's more of a social construct than a mechanical construct, I think.
Although I would argue, and sort of one of my kind of core ideas with a lot of these mechanisms is that the mechanisms themselves can be kind of by default a little bit more or less interactive, but an awful lot of it is how it's implemented. So if you think of like a drafting game, for instance, a drafting game can be very, very loose. I mean, it can be very, I mean, so take not even loose, but take something like Sagrada. I mean, you're drafting dice to go into your window. You're not going to hate draft. I mean, you need to draft the dice that you need to draft. And maybe every once in a while it's 50-50 between a couple. So you're going to take something that might be a little bit worse for another player, but it's generally you are taking the thing that works for you. But there's a lot of other drafting games where the incentives that are built into the gaming structure are such that you have a lot of incentive to hate draft. I mean, I was thinking of something like even It's a Wonderful World, where all of the cards are
really funny game to hate drafted, but yeah.
What's up?
It's just a funny title for a game that you can hate draft it.
Well, and I don't even know if it's the best example, but it's just one that I was thinking about a little bit. But the cards are multi-use. So whenever you draft a card, you can either build it yourself or you can chuck it for one of the resources. And so a lot of the times you're like, oh, I know my opponent is in blue cubes. I am not going to give my opponent this card. Also, the card is useful for me because it gives me basically a free resource of another type. And so by adding that dual use cards, you make it much more feasible to hate draft kind of built into the system.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think like even just like a sealed booster draft or any type of drafting in Magic the Gathering, you are actively, because the system players know the system so well, you're actively drafting against people so that they can't bring that to bear against you, right? Like that's a pretty simple way of drafting. But I know in most cases, I don't know the mathematics of it all, but I would say that in a lot of cases, if there's not a good option, hate drafting will work. But most of the time, you're going to be building for your own betterment, or you should be building for your own betterment, just to fulfill the mechanics of the game. Then you should be hate drafting. And in most situations, it's better to, or the game should incentivize that. That's kind of what I'm getting at.
Though I will say, I do think there's a big player count difference. I mean, any kind of a 2-player game is automatically going to be much more zero sum than a larger player count game. And so in a 4 or 5 player game, you're not going to really hate draft that item, but maybe in a 2-player game, if it really messes with your opponent, it might be very hard as a designer to incentivize taking the thing that helps you more than taking the thing that hurts somebody else.
Yeah, and I guess when you have like only one other target, like when it's a 2-player game, it's only the other person, right?
Right.
That the weight of your decision is that much heavier. We have some questions because people are here. So Jack, I'll get back to your question in a second. But Cody says DC gang. And Cody Whitfield says, I can see wanting to remove take that or combat elements from a game. Are there other times when you would want to remove interaction?
Yeah.
Connie.
So first thing that comes to mind is there's a real trade-off between interactivity and analysis paralysis, particularly when you get to more complicated Euro games. So basically the more a board state changes between one player's turn and another, the longer you potentially have to think about your turn. Basically anything that even a market that clears too frequently. I mean, I was playing Wondrous Creatures and it's a lovely game, but that market clears way too often. And so every single time you have to take your turn, if you want to play well, you have to read all of the cards in the market again. So I do think there could be times where maybe, for instance, blind drawing instead of changing, a market or something like that. But I mean, I think just in general, smaller changes to the shared space will create less analysis paralysis. And so you might want to fix that or not even fix, but change it by, slightly less changes between turns, which might also affect interaction.
That's a great point. Love it. Love it. George, what about you? What do you think? Are there times when you'd want to remove interaction?
I am thinking analysis paralysis, and I'm thinking mostly about the complexity of people's tableaus and an understanding of not necessarily removing the interest in what other people are playing, because I think that's probably a bridge too far, but like being able to narrow that scope where like maybe I don't know, you've got different colored cards or something, and like this turn the only ones that matter fall into this particular segment, and it'll help narrow the search space basically. I think that especially in a multiplayer game, you're saying you've got 4 people with 15 cards in front of them. Even if you're one of them, that is an enormous amount of space to keep track of when it's changing on every player's turn. It's just not a good. It's not even just that it's going to slow people down. It's overwhelming, and it feels like you can't play well because there's too much information to absorb that's changing on a regular basis.
Right. So that's interaction between you and the game state as opposed to you and another player. But the players can change the game state as well, right? So
they're responsible for those portions of the game state.
Yeah. Yeah, your brain is not as good at bubble sorting these things up as there might be. So I definitely think there are times you want to remove interaction if you're also looking to create a specific experience, right? So if you want to create a feeling of isolation, if you want to create a feeling or experience where there is scarcity and things like that, interaction isn't going to do that. So why have it, right? You can probably lead into other areas that you're going to say this game is strong in this. The other thing, and I agree with you, Connie, that things like trading and negotiation, high interaction points really can be disastrous for time, can really create a lot of bad feelings. And the other thing that happens when you have trading and auctions and things like that, but with players, is some people will argue that that's poor design, it's lazy design because you're letting your players decide the values of things, whatever. But I also do think that if players don't understand valuation and they can't evaluate things quickly, then you're going to end up with a game that is going to leave people with feeling bad, very bad the first time, and it won't click until like the second or third play. And in today's modern market, as a product, that may not fly depending on the length of time that game takes to play and set up and the depth of play and whether the people actually like it or not, right? Because there are definitely some games where it's like, oh, now I get it, let's play again. And there's some games that's like, that's what it was, not gonna waste my time with it again.
And that's a good point, and it kind of goes to game fragility too, in a sense that if players don't know how to value things, and if there are these high interaction points, you may end up having a situation where the game just kind of goes off the rails, or it doesn't function the way that it's necessarily supposed to, or where some of the players at the table, just as you said, have a really bad experience. And one of the things that I can't remember, I heard it on a podcast, I can't even remember who said it, but the majority of people who ever play your game are going to lose, and so kind of ensuring that,
Totally true.
and so ensuring
What a great logical thing that like you just don't think about. It's like, oh yeah, 75% of the people who play my 4-player game are losers.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and so, they should feel ashamed of themselves. But I
Right,
mean, in all
but
seriousness, though, I do think the people who lose have to have an enjoyable experience in order to come back to your game. And so I do think that, in particular, if there are very interactive moments that really create losers in the game, that's a feeling that might stick with players more so than, to your friend. If it's like an environmentally created situation or something that's coming from the game to all of the players.
yeah. Here's an interesting point. When I play a game for the first time, I actually don't play to win. I might win, but that's not my point. I usually ask the person who taught the game or who's more experienced or played it before, it's like, what is a good score in this game? Right? If it's a game that has score. And that's all I aim for. And the thing about it is that I find when I have a number to work towards, that I can actually make good decisions, right? If a good score would be this. Okay, well, I'm going to get 1 point for this. Why would I want to do that? And yes, obviously, I should know that 1 point and 5 points are totally different. But I find that having something to work towards actually keeps me more engaged in the game than winning and losing completely. And I wonder if there's something to that. As I'm saying it, like, is there something to telling people what is a good expected thing so they have a good experience? Like, oh, I did okay. I didn't win, but I did okay. Next time I'll try to do better. Especially in a lot of games where some games you don't know how to do better. How do I do better? Do I roll more sixes? I can't control that. Which is where we get to that whole kind of, input output mitigation, right? Jack says, as designers, do you use interactivity as a tool to zero in on your target audience? Connie.
I mean, I think I should do it more than I do, absolutely. But I mean, I think as designers, and especially as one gets to be a little bit more experienced, you are kind of constantly reevaluating the fit between the mechanisms that you're using and the audience that you're creating. And so I know for me, especially if I'm kind of designing in kind of a mid-weight range with a fair number of strategic decisions, I do want to be careful that those are often the folks who aren't going to want some kind of a take that mechanism, thrown in there. But I don't know. Actually, this is a really good question that I don't know if I have a great answer to. So I'm curious, George and Sen, what do you guys think?
Oh, Lord.
I don't know, George. What do you think?
I echo your point that it's probably a tool I should use more. I have an idea. This is one of those areas that I have an idea of how, when I put something together, how I would expect it to play, but then I'm probably not spending enough time trying to thinking about how people who aren't in my head would expect it to play, and adjusting before I put it on a table in front of people might save a few I wouldn't say wasted playtests, but certainly le- less productive playtests.
Mhm. How do you know they're not in your head, George?
I mean, sometimes they probably are. It's
Yeah, I mean, we do this all the time. I wouldn't say that it's front of mind when we're doing it, but we create games that are specific experiences. That's my philosophy towards design is I want to make an experience. How do I do that? And so interactivity becomes one of the kind of levers that I'm pushing and pulling on to create a specific experience, right? What's that about?
Uh, just the sorry, it's we have often have sirens next door, so I do
Oh,
apologize. I'll
that's
try to
okay.
keep
No, no, no.
try to keep
It was
muted,
it
but
was
that's coming in through the window, so I apologize.
it's a neat siren. What kind of siren is that?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. There's we have it's a there's a kind of a apartment complex right next door that
Yeah.
often has a lot of odd sounds coming from it. So
Drama.
okay.
drama, yeah, let's put it
Okay.
that way.
Yeah. So, sorry, back to your question, Jack. Yeah. So, for example, we're working on a cozy game right now, a game that is supposed to feel cozy, and interaction feels cozy, but interaction where you're fighting with each other doesn't feel cozy. And so, we've made a point of in this game that we're actually have a meeting about tomorrow. I should probably prepare. Instead of being here, but I'm here, so I'll tell you about it. In the game, you give gifts to other people. That's the point of interaction because
Oh,
it makes you feel cozy. Now, we started this way, and the problem that one of the players, well, actually, she's a co-designer with me. She's like, "Yeah, but we always give the gift to the person who's losing, who has the lowest score, and so it feels like." We are giving the gift in a spiteful, not in a spiteful way, but in like a pitying way. And so that didn't really create the experience that she wanted to feel. She always felt like when she was given the gifts that they were given in a like, oh, poor you kind of way. And so we had to work around that experience as well, that both parties were joyful when they got the gift. And anyways, it worked out in the end, but that's the kind of stuff that we are often thinking about is like, how does the interaction change the experience or how does the interaction dictate the type of experience that the players are having at the table when they are interacting with each other? And what does it feel like, right? A really clean example of that is a game like even Codenames. Such a silly, simple game. I played it as a prototype with Vlaja at the gathering when it first, well, before it came out ever, right? And it's like, this is ridiculous. How did you decide? It's like everybody at the table was like, man, like, we should just give up now because it's like this is just like quintessential perfection in game design. If you think about it, like Jenga, code names, those types of games are just like chef's kiss when it comes to game design. But the interaction in there is it is like giving you the feeling of like a spy master and an agent, and I can only give you one word, but I want to stuff so much information into that one iota of information that I'm giving you, so I have to do my job. And I think that's what I like to do in game design is give you the feelings by the way that you're interacting with other players, if at all, right? Like I said, in a game where I'm trying to simulate a feeling of isolationist or, stark survival or something like that, I wouldn't necessarily have that. And I think who brought up Misery Farm? Who brought up? I think Connie, you brought up Agricola. I call it Misery Farm. That's what we've called it. Like,
Yeah. No, I mentioned Agricola at one point.
yeah. And that game, like the points of interaction are minimal for lots of reasons because like, you don't want people to be able to trade their way out of this experience that Uwe wanted you to have, which is you need to feed the people that you have, right? That kind of thing. So anyway, there you go. Jesse says when he's talking about interaction, he thinks about strategical and tactical chatting with players. Interesting, interesting. Also, to see if other players will or may bluff on their turn phase or throughout the game. That's fascinating, right? So there's also that social interaction, that talk that might be above the game or over the game or about the game. That's a cool little point there, Jesse. So, Connie, what do you think about that? Like, how does a game engender interaction in the communication between players?
Well, I think there's a few different things. I mean, one, talking about sort of the social deduction games that we were talking about earlier. I mean, there's a lot of your magic circle is going to change a lot from one game to the other. I mean, you have a game like Blood on the Clock Tower, and most of the gameplay is sort of above the table, lying, you know, all of that kind of stuff, or something like The Resistance Evelyn, which is one of my favorite games of all time. But I think you also have that in a lot of other games too. I mean, take something like Quacks of Quedlinburg, for instance. It's a very, very solitary game. I mean, in a lot of ways. I mean, you weren't really doing much of anything with the other players. But you have those at the explosions. Your pot explodes. You have that kind of moment that, like, one more thing, one more chip, and then it kind of explodes in it. And oftentimes somebody has that game where they draw three chips and they explode, out of the bag, and it happens round after round after round. And so you just kind of have these moments. And I know one of the things that Stonemaier Games, for instance, is always looking for are big, big moments in games. And I think
Yeah.
that kind of ties to the what are the players going to remember in 3 months, 6 months, or a year. And a lot of times it's something happened to somebody, but then there was a story, kind of a story around that.
Yeah, I like that. I like that concept of games and stories are linked in so many ways, right? You can have a game that tells a story, you can have a game that is a story, you can have the stories that you tell about the games that you play, right? And it's all very different. But I like that one a lot because it is that big moment creates those stories that we tell again and again and again, about things that we like that happen in a game. So creating a game that creates those memory moments, those moments that we call like Fiero, hands in the air. That's very cool. Very cool. What about you, George? What about talking at a table? What about that kind of social interaction, not just the deduction part?
It makes me think a lot about not so much within a game, but especially with games that you play repeatedly with people, and whether they're competitive, something like the meta game within a circle of people who play together
Yeah.
regularly. Like, this is coming from playing lots of TCGs and stuff in the '90s. Like, you would get a dynamic, and people would sit down, and we would automatically have an idea, regardless what they showed up with, a blind situation. Like, there's already a bias at the table as to how we're going to interact with everyone else, because we know the way they play and how often they're going to lie to us, how often they're going to be honest about things. Just the speed at which they're going to play, and I find that sort of interaction. It's an interaction that happened before we ever sat down at this table to play this particular instance of this game. Like, we have a certain state of expectation, and I like how that carries on in, like, it's a legacy game aspect in games that don't have a legacy game component, in a sense.
That's an interesting point. I really do enjoy that facet of it as well. Like the interaction through metagaming, and through like the culture of gaming or the culture
Yeah.
of a specific game, right?
Mm.
So both George and I, big Magic players at some point in our lives. Connie, did you play Magic a lot at all?
No, no.
I
My husband
doubt.
keeps trying
Well
to get
done.
me into it, and it just
I mean,
hasn't
yeah.
hasn't quite stuck.
Well done for you. No, that's probably a good. It's probably an okay thing. You should probably play some.
I've played a
Just
little bit.
oh, okay, good. Just as just like as a
Yeah.
to look at
Mm.
the design because it's like a classic design. But yeah, that whole meta of going to track down the cards and find the cards, and you have to talk to people about their strategies, and you're looking up stuff online. That's a total other way that you can get interaction off of the table outside of the actual game, and that's really interesting. And very few, not very few, but not too many games can claim that as a part of their system. And though I do know now a lot of games like are trying to build that in, like they design them with organized play in mind. They have
Mm.
whole staff that are just designing the organized play modes for the game. My friend Andrew is the designer for Pokemon's organized play. right? So I know for a fact that he gets paid money to figure out how tournaments are run, right? And how
Right.
what games are what cards are not allowed in that tournament anymore, and how much of a card, and whatever what are the prize structures going to be, and how do we support the people that are playing and showing off the games in their stores and national wide tournaments and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of design that actually goes into that in order to cultivate a community and to make it rich and prosperous, so that the company itself gets rich and prosperous, because a lot of it actually isn't in the company, it's in the aftermarket, right?
Mhm.
But the aftermarket draw is driven by the desire to have all the cards, because it's Pokemon. You have to catch them all, right? That's the rule. It's in the title. Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of stuff there to talk about meta interaction as well. Connie, we probably strayed really far from what we want to talk
That's
about,
fine.
but let's get back to the core question of creating interaction at the table in the game. You had a lot to say about like axes and categories. So
Yeah, yeah.
let's kind of reiterate where we're coming from, or where you were coming from.
Yeah, sure. So, at some point, if we have time right before we end, I might run through a quick list of mechanisms that people might not think of as interactive, but that can be quite interactive.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to do before we do that is just kind of dig into different types of interaction a little bit more. Because we've talked about kind of the meta and the kind of above the table interaction, but within a particular game, you can kind of think of interaction. You can have positive versus negative interaction, and sort of everything in between. I mean, to Sen's gift giving example, I've also played a couple of interesting semi co-op games where you have some really interesting decisions on that axis. You have intentional versus incidental interaction. Basically, and this goes back to sort of the hate drafting idea. Like, did I just take something that I wanted that you also wanted? I would call that very incidental. Or intentional. Am I taking this specifically to block you? Am I getting in your way? Am I beating you in area control? Something like that. It's very similar to like direct versus indirect interaction. I mean, so direct interaction might be I'm taking your worker placement space, or I'm bidding more than you did on something like this, or you might have something less direct. I mean, I'm changing the board state. I'm creating a new element to the board that then you can later interact with. And then finally, the last thing that I wanted to call out, and this is a term that's used in variants a lot, kind of your input versus output, but that's also another kind of way of interaction. Like, does the interaction affect the inputs in a particular game or the outputs? And what I mean by that is, if you block a space, I can't take that space anymore. That affects my inputs. Or are we comparing scores at the end? Is it a race? Is it who has the most of something? Which is very much not, it doesn't impact what I do exactly. It impacts how that thing is scored, which then goes into my incentives that way. So I just kind of wanted to walk through a few of those kind of different axes.
Well, I like how you're thinking, because those are literally the toolkit, right? That you can use to ramp up interaction or ramp it down if there's too much, or the game's taking too long because people are fighting over this thing. But there's a lot of games that use one or two of those axes to really kind of say, this is how we're going to interact today in this game, in this space, right? We're all vying. I have a game that I really like. I wish it would stick with a publisher. The publishers always end up folding or something. COVID was horrible. But one where everybody's scoring stuff, but what gets scored doesn't change. How much the different things get scored changes depending on players' votes. And how many votes you can get into certain categories, and I think that's a really neat way of reacting. And it's not perpetual, but it evolves over time. So one thing gets scored in round one, or at least the scoring gets locked in round one. One thing gets locked, and then the second thing gets locked in round two, and third thing gets locked in round three, and then you score the whole thing. And so the idea there is like you said, we're changing interaction. We have to interact together to get it to score one way or another. Whether that's, you consider that direct or indirect, I don't know, but it is that kind of thing where we're changing inputs and outputs, and I like that a lot.
So actually, I have a question for you then, Sen, about your game. So
Sure.
so when the players are setting, how are they setting what scores? I mean, is it decisions that the players are intentionally making, or is it, because I know some games do it almost as a leftover. Whichever thing is left at the end is the thing that scores, which I think is
Oh no,
also is very different.
yeah, no, this is very intentional. So you're building a city, and you're deciding does like residential score versus parks versus industrial versus community like civic buildings, that kind of thing. So like 4 classes of buildings, what is going to score in what way, depending on what round it is, and the players organically generate the winning conditions or the score conditions, and then they have to react to it in the round after that.
It's
That's how it
very
works.
cool.
Yeah, it's fun. I'll have to brush it off and maybe put some more work into it, because it's been like, it was signed like in 2015 and it's still never been made because the company that assigned it, maybe it's a cursed game, maybe that's what it is. I don't know. Maybe not 2015, maybe 2019. Yeah, probably 2019 it was probably signed, and then COVID happened, and then it's been signed again, and then let go again, and signed again, and then companies get folded again. But anyway, it's a really cool game. I really like it. And it's a short game. That's the thing. Like we built it as like a Carcassonne killer. So, and I think it could do that uh, in a way. I mean, I don't think it'll ever sell the volume that Carcassonne has sold. It doesn't have, you know, almost 25 years of legacy to it. But I think it's a more interesting game than Carcassonne without with even less time on the table. It's a really snappy, fast game. Anyways, that's more enough about my game. Sorry, keep going, keep going.
I was just thinking as you went through that list of things, and this sort of circles back to where we actually started the whole conversation about the conflation of potentially of interaction competition. That so many of the things that you listed could just as equally be used to open doors for other players as they are to close doors for other players. It's just how you decide to implement them.
Oh, that's interesting too, right?
Yeah. Well, I do think it's really interesting that for you can have the very same mechanism that has kind of drastically different impacts on how much interaction and like what the feeling of those interaction is. I mean, so for instance, you could have some kind of a shared infrastructure, which I sort of mentioned before, and on the very, very non-interactive side, you have a game called like Roll to the Top, which is a roll and write game. But every time you roll a set of shared dice.
Oh.
Oh, something weird happened. Let's see if Connie comes back. Huh, that's interesting. I don't know what just happened. Oh,
Yeah, that was very abrupt.
yeah, it's very
I wonder where
abrupt.
that goes.
Well, we'll find out. Hopefully, Connie will jump back in because I'm really interested in this story.
Yeah, I wonder where this is going.
Yeah. So while we're waiting for Connie to come back in, hopefully she'll come back in. Hopefully nothing's happened with that. Siren that was going on next door,
She didn't
or
see
the
the
cat.
alarm.
Yeah, she didn't see the alarm. Yeah. So hopefully she comes back. But while we're doing that, audience, do you have any other thoughts on interaction? Connie's coming back. She's jumping in.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Okay.
You're back. There's Connie.
Yeah.
Sorry, not sure what happened. My computer had a little bit of a heart attack there, so
Oh, we don't like that.
went low.
Connie went low interaction.
I decided I had enough of this like interactive experience, and I was out.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't
carry
know.
on from what you were saying.
Yeah, so I can't remember. I don't know exactly where it cut out, but one thing I just wanted to flag is like you can have the same mechanism, same core mechanism that has a very different experience. So if like some kind of a shared infrastructure can be very, very late, very low interaction. So there's a roll and write game that I enjoy called Roll to the Top, where you basically can remove or add dice to the main pool. And if you add a D4 versus a D6 versus a D12, you can do that based on your relative position compared to the other players. So it's a shared infrastructure, and you are looking at other players, but it's very minimal. You can take that all the way to On Mars, where the entire game is about building your same shared infrastructure and then using what the other players have done. And there's a real kind of gradient there from your non-interactive. Then you have something like Lords of Waterdeep, where you're building extra action spaces for people. You have Anno 1800, where you're sharing each other's resources. You have something like Undergrove, where again, you're building a shared tableau, but you still kind of care about your part of it a little bit. Again, all the way to your On Mars, where it's just completely commingled. And I think it's sort of interesting how much the incentives change and how much they feel different, even though it's kind of the same concept in each example.
Yeah, I remember way back when, like maybe the early 2010s-ish era of gaming, when somebody had designed a game, and I can't remember what it was, but it's like you got to follow the action of the person. If
Hmm.
they took an action, you could take that little minor action if you like
Uh,
paid a little bit of money or paid a point or whatever.
hmm.
And that just changed everybody's perception. Like, oh, I can do stuff not on my turn.
Yeah.
I can do stuff if I want to. And I think those types of things, that's really neat. And so you start being interested in what other people are doing. Machi Koro did it, but with dice, right? With like
Yep.
really simple, it's not a decision that you have to make, but it's like, I bought that so I could interact with the game on your turn, right? Because I don't just want to interact on my turn, I want to interact on everybody's turn. That's more efficient, right? More dice being rolled, more efficient for me. So I think there's a lot to be said for all the different types of interaction, and the war that we're going to wage, Connie, with Connie at the helm, saying, "Take that" isn't the only form of interaction, right? Direct conflict is not the only form of interaction. All right. So what else is there, Connie, in your thesis?
Well, so I have the classification system, and I know we're sort of out of time, but if you don't mind, I'm just going
No.
to run through a few kind of core, different ways to think about interaction or different types of interaction that can be a little bit less aggressive. So we
Yeah.
talked about the market. You can also have a market with a twist where what you take influences what other people can take. Like Rococo is a good example of this. You buy a thing, everything else gets cheaper. Castle Combo, it switches which row other players can buy from. You have comparative, which can be something like just we compare scores or we compare, objectives. That applies to area control too. I mean, comparing your tokens or your objects in a particular region. You have combat, which does not have to be all that aggressive. If you think of something like Dune Imperium, that's essentially a check, an auction mechanism that's modeled as combat. You have any kind of race, which could be an actual physical race, or it could be a race to solve a puzzle. I mean, something like Turing Machine or the Search for Lost Species. It's basically you are racing against the other players at the table. You can have variable end game conditions, which, as we talked about, has to do with what the other players are doing at the table. I mean, something like Rajas of the Ganges or Ark Nova, where you're directly looking at what other players are doing and reacting accordingly. You can have time tracks and variable turn order. So, do I want to jump ahead? Do I want to take itty bitty turns? That's directly impacted by what other people are doing. You can then bid for that turn order as well. I mean, something like a Five Tribes or Viticulture, where you're making this decision that influences the entire rest of the round. I'm about halfway done with my list. I'll keep going.
Oh yeah,
Go
we
for it.
got time. We have people are locked in.
All right, excellent.
Yeah.
As I said, you have shared resources, infrastructure, and economies. I gave a few examples of those before, but that's a very, very broad category. You can have shared discard piles, which I think is a particularly fascinating one. I mean, for a shuffle, for instance, what you discard can go directly into other players' hands.
Yeah,
Hadara does this as well. A lot of roll and writes do it, and a lot of, as I said, a lot of games, whatever doesn't get taken is the thing that scores at the end of the game. You have your drafting games, which can, again, be very interactive or very non-interactive, depending on the particular draft. You have your roll and writes and your flip and writes, which, again, are normally very low interactive, but a lot of times people get to do something with the discards. And then also you have something like Tiny Towns, where one player makes a decision for everyone, and that game is incredibly interactive. I mean, it's like a meat grinder in a little teeny tiny box.
yeah. It's so simple, but super interactive.
Right, right. As Sen mentioned, you have your follow mechanisms, which can be anything like your Puerto Rico, where it shapes your entire strategy, to something like Earth, where maybe it's a little bit more incidental, or something like Glass Road, which is all mind games. I mean, who's going to do what, when, and how do I make the best use of it? You have your positive interaction and your passive benefits. Sen, you mentioned Machikoro, Space Base is very similar. You're kind of doing things on other players' turns. You're kind of building things up. And some of those games can be a little more complicated with a little more decision making. You have blocking. I mean, we talked about that with Agricola, but consider something like Apiary that has a bumping mechanism. So yes, you're in that person's way. Yes, they should be paying attention to whether or not you're there, but they can still go to that spot. Versus something like Architects of the West Kingdom, where you can go if you have more workers there. So it's relevant, but you can still go to that space. Versus something like, again, Agricola, that's a very, very hard and a very punishing block. And then finally, the last thing on my list is something like semi-co-op, where you have something like Molly House, or I played a game called Winter Rabbit that has a similar mechanism where you collectively need to accomplish a thing, or the whole group loses. So those are just some variations of mechanisms that I think can foster a real sense of interaction, again, without that kind of core aggression. Sorry, I know I went through that very quickly.
No, Connie, do you have that written down or typed anywhere? Would
Yeah.
you like? Would you be okay with like emailing it to me at some
Yeah, I
point, and
can
I
do
can
that.
post it? That'd
I
be
know I
awesome.
talked. I know I talked very quickly. I'm sorry. I tend to do that.
No, 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 no. I was riveted for the whole 3 minutes that you talked
Thank
straight.
you.
That was great. No, that was really good. George, what do you think, man? You're the one who asked the question. Did Connie come up with a good answer?
I think so. Yeah, we'll give that a thumbs up. Yeah.
Yeah. Does this make you
I mean,
does
I've
this
walked
make
away
you
with more
think
to think
differently?
about. Yeah, it's not so much an answer as like a new pool of things to consider. But that's better than just an answer. So.
Yeah, I think so too. I think what you did is really kind of broaden the scope of
Mm,
what we can consider interaction. And I know most people out there who are at least a little bit savvy about board games and design of board games, just like, yeah, it's not just combat, but they're probably hard pressed to think about, well, then what is it, or what mechanics could be used, or what mechanisms could be used. So I definitely think that that list will be helpful for people, just even to like think about, um, because a lot of times, a lot of people will just simply classify, oh, it's a roll and write, very low player interaction. It's like it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't
It
have
doesn't
to be.
have to be.
That's the thing.
mm,
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because when you think about a game and you think about all the mechanisms that go into that box, if you just shake that box a little and those mechanisms are maybe played in a different order or like a percentage difference this way or that way, you're going to have a different experience, therefore a different game. So I think that's kind of the take home message that I have with this one is that I really like the idea of that the levers in games and that you can push and pull on
mm.
them to get the kind of experience that you want and the amount of interaction that you want or the type of interaction that you want. Because yeah, fighting isn't for everybody. Everybody was not kung fu fighting. They might have been giving gifts to each other, but interaction is, I think, what people really, really want in certain types of games, right? Um, and if they don't want that, then there's a bunch of games that don't do that as much, and that's cool too. Right? Cool. Hey, I think it's time to go to bed. I taught for the first time today, and I'm super tired. So my summer break is over, and I'm back to the classroom. My classes are all online, and that's annoying too because I sit for like 3 hours straight almost, and my butt hurts. Anyway, so if you would like to chat with me, you can reach me mostly on Blue Sky. That's where I talk mostly about games and apparently my children and my wife using dishes. That's what I talked about today. On Dreyer Inc. On all the things, you can find George and Kat, who's living her best life in where is she now?
Prague.
In Prague, and she found you a place to go
Yes.
and stay. That's wonderful. And so Kat is there as the advanced scout, as we call her. And if you want to talk to any of us, you can reach us at Meeple Syrup on all the things. Connie, where can people talk to you?
Yeah, I'm at Connie VDC on Blue Sky. That's basically the only place to find me. Although if you send me a message on BGG, I will almost certainly respond, or at least I'll read it. But yeah, please hit me up on Blue Sky.
There you go. Cody says, "So glad I tuned in. Great talk." Yes, thanks, Richard. Cody. Thanks, Cody. We enjoyed having you on and great questions. Next week, George, what do you got for next week? What do you know? What do you think? What would you like
Um,
to talk about?
I have some ideas, but let's see if we can find someone to fit them.
Right? I mean, it's as
It
simple
worked
as
out this week
asking.
for sure.
It worked out this week.
Yeah.
If you have burning questions,
Yeah,
let us
but
know,
please,
and we can
audience.
try to find answers. Yes, audience as well, right? If you'd like to help keep the lights on, just go to patreon.com/maple syrup. That's okay if you don't as well. And hey, you know what, Connie? It's that time that I told you you'd have to be responsible solely for. It is time for final advice.
Yeah, I think my final advice is just think back to the first time you joined a game or joined a Euro game and what made that experience stick. You know, why did you keep coming back for more? Was it the games? Was it the people? Was it the environment? Was it all of the above? And next time you see somebody who's experiencing their first Euro game, try to give them that same experience.
That's lovely. Be a good player, and you'll get more people playing to games with. I just wanted to give a quick plug to my game Grendel, which is on Kickstarter right now, and it is at almost 200% funded, which is
Yay.
lovely. So if you like asymmetry, if you like comic books and anti-heroes, Grendel is Matt Wagner's seminal work from the 80s,
Mm.
and it's still published and written today. It is a wonderfully wicked comic. It's very interesting, and the gameplay is real fun, with a bunch of neat mechanical innovations that we don't think have been done anywhere. So yeah, go check it out. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. It's been lovely to see everybody, and let's get this off the stuff. Come on, get off. I'm not a shill, not totally a shill. Anyways, thanks so much, Connie. Thanks for
Yes, thank
coming,
you.
and George.
Thanks for
That was a
having me.
great question. Let's get you to frame some more, and then we'll find
Okay.
people to write dissertations on it.
Okay.
All right, we'll
The
see y'all
bar's been
later. Good
set.
night, everybody.
Good night, all.
Bye.
Bye.